seen it like the edit mode, not in the presentation mode.
Right. How's that?
Now, yep, perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
I just go ahead and I'll just leave this up.
Sounds good.
Let's just
I guess
check.
it's 8:30. I look at my clock and realize what time it is.
It is.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Read Cohort for November 2022. I guess we have a couple of announcements. I'm going to ask the other managers to double check if they have any. Pete, do you have any announcements?
Hey, good morning, Lynn. Good morning, everybody. I would just encourage participants while they're on the call today to, if they have any ideas for future topics, put them in the chat. I know the managers are planning a planning session right after this. So if you're on and there's a topic you'd like to see covered, if there's a topic you'd like to cover, drop it in the chat for us. Thanks.
Melissa, do you have any? No announcements?
No, I just wanted to say hello. Good morning.
Morning. Okay, I'm going to drop this one, and I don't think the managers even know about this, but next December's Read Cohort meeting is just a couple days before Christmas. Knowing that most people are off and are not going to be working, we're not going to have a big presentation or anything. But what I would like to do is that I will be on, and if anybody else wants to join and talk and just, I want it to be a sport network for people, especially around the holidays and after the stress of the fire season, the last few years and everything. If anybody just wants to be on and hang out as resource advisors and support each other, come on. We'll be here for an hour. I'll be there for an hour. So bring a coffee, bring whatever, and let's just support each other, have a good time, talk about things. If you got issues you need to talk about, we'll at least try to point you to the right place. Maybe give some advice on things that we've had. We're not counselors or anything, but we want to. I want us as a community to support each other. Okay. So that's what we will do for next month's, I think it's December 22nd, but I don't have my calendar in front of me. So, all right, I'm just going to let Bob introduce himself because he's done some great talks for us in the past, but Margaret knows him better than I do, and she couldn't be here today, so I'm just going to let Bob introduce himself. Thanks for being here, Bob. Thanks for talking to us.
Okay, my pleasure. And a warning right off the bat: technology is not my strong point. I'd rather give this talk live in front of 50,000 people than have to rely on my computer skills to do it. But we'll do the best we can here. My name is Bob Rich. I am a retired logging specialist from Region 3. I spent 3 years down in R3 in the sunny Southwest. Prior to that, I was a forester for the state of Montana for 22 years and taught as an adjunct instructor during that same time at U of M in timber harvesting. I think I mentioned in my bio, if anybody read that, my first fire was the week after I graduated from high school back in 1976 when Gerald Ford was still president. So 46 years ago. It's been a while, and I'm retired up in Missoula, Montana right now, where I call home. So I've been asked to talk about fire equipment on incidents for resource advisors. I'll let you know I'm a timber guy first that did a fair amount of fire. I was carded as a division soup for a number of years. I haven't been on an incident for a while, though. Equipment, has a lot of advantages. It is safer because if you look at the equipment on your screen, you don't see anybody outside of a cab. Everybody is inside a cab where it's very difficult to get hurt. It can have a very low impact when you use the right type of equipment or different types of equipment in combination. So when we talk about using the equipment for rehab, you can see on the right-hand side, there's an excavator doing rehab. Even more importantly, I think you can avoid some of the heavy impacts of the dozer-only approach by using the whole suite of equipment that's available to you. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And it's also highly productive. So it's economical, it's expensive by the hour, but it gets a lot of work done. It's safe. And I think you can reduce resource impact by using the equipment in the right combination and in the right manner. So we're going to jump right into it. Lynn, I'm going to ask you to keep an eye on the chat for me because I get kind of focused on the presentation. I don't even have it on the screen. So if there's a question, I'll count on you to relay it for me. And we do have I tried to pare this down to 45 minutes, but it was painful. So I'm going to talk really fast and we're going to cover a lot of information, hopefully. So here we go. Okay, as I mentioned, equipment, you're going to see more and more of it on incidents these days. You know, dozers have been around forever, but we started seeing feller bunchers and excavators and other machines used, at least in Region 1, 25 years ago. As I learned, as I go to other regions, not everybody is real familiar with it. Where you see a lot of equipment is where you have a real vibrant forest products industry, and that isn't all of our regions. I think you'll see a lot of it in a lot of the equipment in Regions 1, 6, and now it's filtering down to the other regions. So what we're going to go over here is how the equipment works, so you can understand the mechanics of it, how it's utilized on an incident, because most of this equipment is really logging equipment, the type of impacts you can get from the equipment, and safety considerations. When you're working around it, you need to be your own safety officer. Other people may be trying to look out for you, but don't abdicate your responsibility to be responsible for your safety. If you don't look out for yourself, don't count on other people to do it. So some safety considerations when you're around the equipment. Okay, we're going to talk about feller bunchers, rubber-tired skidders, dozers, excavators, masticator mulchers. They're the same thing. People just call them different things. And then skidgeons and pumper cats. Okay, right off the bat, feller buncher. Feller bunchers are used primarily on incidents for falling timber in line construction. They're also excellent for hazard tree falling that's unsafe to put a human being underneath. Secondary uses, if you have the right type of saw head, which we'll discuss saw heads in just a moment, they can be used for brush clearing and also, believe it or not, for line digging. If you look at the back of this head, if you can see my cursor right there, you can drag that like the heel of your boot and put in dandy fire line. You have to have the right type of saw to do that. That's a hot saw there. But you can also dig the line with a feller buncher, which a lot of folks don't realize. It's not a preferred practice. There's better machines for it. But I was on an incident once and we had a feller buncher working and he was putting the fire line in all by himself. He was doing the falling and then he was scratching in the line, kind of like you build that little campfire when it's a little too dry and it starts to move through the pine needles and you use the heel of your boot to dig a little fire line around your fire. That's exactly what he was doing. Okay, feller bunchers are machines that cut trees and they place them into bunches, thus the very clever name, feller buncher. Feller bunchers can be tractor wheeled machines. They can be boomed or non-boomed machines, and they can be leveling or non-leveling. So you look at those two machines and they don't look anything alike. They're feller bunchers. They both perform the job of felling a tree and placing it into a bunch. There's the cutting head. There's the cutting head. The carrier is very dissimilar. because as we'll see, wheeled bunchers are used primarily on gentle ground, where the leveling tracked buncher is used on steeper ground. These will be more common in the west. These will be more common in the southeast, and also places like northern Arizona, northeast California, the Modoc Forest, and east of the Cascades in Oregon, where it's flat country. Okay, most wheeled feller bunchers are four-wheeled. There are a very few of the old three-wheelers out there, but 99.9% of what you're going to see will be four-wheeled machines. They have a cutting head that's mounted directly on the frame. That is the cutting head. That's what cuts the tree. They have to drive to each tree, and then they have to drive to each bunch to lay the tree down. So they cover a lot of the area. Wheel bunchers do not level. And generally, you'll see them on 25% slope or less. They can go steeper as long as they're pointed straight down the hill. If they go side hill, they roll over. So generally for the flatter ground, not mountainous country. They are dominant in the southeast. If you go to Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, coastal plain, that's the type of machine that you'll see is a wheeled buncher. And as I mentioned, you will see them. They're very common in northern Arizona, Coconino, Kaibab, Abar S, and parts of Oregon, Northern California. And here's a video. He's placing the trees in a bunch there. Okay, I could watch that all day, but we got a lot of material to cover. So that's a wheeled buncher. On to track bunchers, which is going to be what you more commonly see in the western regions. They have a crawler chassis, just like a dozer. This is the chassis, just like it's straight off of like a D7 dozer. The cutting head on this is on the end of a boom. So there's the cutting head. Boomed machines will remain stationary and they reach out to cut trees. And when they've cut the trees within their reach, then they will move the machine. So they're reaching out to the trees and then they will swing and place the trees down into a bunch. Most tracked machines will level. You can see that the operator's cab is on a level plane here while the tracks are going up and down the ground. That allows the operator to cut a tree and swing and place it down and remain on a level plane. So they're adapted for steeper ground. They do make machines that do not level. Generally, they're not in the West. They're in places like maybe the Lake States. But in the West, most machines will level in some way. You can operate 55%. Once you get over 40, 45, you start to have a pretty good impact on the soil, depending on what type of soil you have. But the machine is capable of operating on ground like that, and it can level up to 55%. Most models do. And as I said, boomed bunchers are commonly what you're going to see in the West. Video, before we start it, you can see how that machine is leveled up on steep ground. If it wasn't leveled, that cab would be parallel to the tracks like this, rather than like this. Okay, now this is not a feller buncher. There's a lot of confusion. We've had these show up on incidents from time to time. It does have a felling head. It is a wheeled machine, but it does not qualify as a feller buncher. So it's not listed in Viper. Do not accept this machine if it shows up on your incident. Okay, a little humor there. One thing I'll mention with the feller bunchers also, as you notice, they can lay a tree down. That last part of the video, you saw the machine pivot and then lay those trees down. And if you have hazard trees that are actually inside the line, say it's hot right up to the line, and you've got a tree that's partially on fire and it's a hazard and you want to take it down, but you can't get the machine to it, you can grab a 80-foot high tree and use it just like a fly swatter, and you can swat that hazard tree down 60, 70 feet inside the line by grabbing a green tree and just using it like a fly swatter. It's a great trick for taking hazard trees down when it's too hot to get a machine or a person to the base of the hazard tree, and it's very safe. Okay, the cutting heads. What you'll commonly see is something called a continuous disc saw. Don't ever refer to it on that to a logger, because they'll look at you with a blank look and they'll say, "Oh, you mean a hot saw?" And you'll say, "Yeah, a hot saw." This disc here spins continuously at about 1,000 RPMs. It is very efficient. They have been the state of the art for about the last 20, 25 years. This is the one that you can use to cut brush with. It's just like a giant weed whacker, so you can move through and cut. After the tree is cut, it sits on this table. So when you notice them accumulating trees, holding on to several of them, they're sitting on a table similar to this. So call them hot saws. That's the one that'll make that melodic sound. That's a hot saw. You may also encounter bar saws. This is an old bar saw. I took this picture a long time ago. They are a much less efficient saw. That's why you don't see them around. But you will see a bar on harvester heads, which you'll see in Region 6. There's a lot of harvesters there. A harvester differs from a feller buncher in the fact that they cut the tree, hold on to it, and then they process it into logs right at the stump. A lot of them in Oregon and Washington. And they will have bar saws on them. So be advised. But a hot saw for an incident, I think, is the best tool to use. You will see lots of harvester heads, though, if you're in Region 6, too. Okay, on incidents, they are excellent machines for clearing fire line, whether it's timber or pinyon juniper. Production on these, I think, in timber like you see there, this is in western Montana, a line that's 50 feet wide. If operations says we want a 50-foot wide line here, they can do it 50 feet wide and a mile long in one shift, no problem. That's, I think, in terms of log loads per hour, and in a 12-hour shift, 2 loads per acre, that's 12 loads. They can easily do that in that type of a timber type. So highly productive machines. You can cut the timber and bunch it and then remove it by skidders. So the skidder comes along. We'll talk about skidders in just a second, and drag those logs out. If the area that's cleared is narrow, like this is a pretty narrow line, the fire was just backing down the hill, and so they put in a real narrow line. They didn't need much. They just put them over here, and then the dozer came in and constructed the line and didn't have to root trees out by the roots. It just put a scratch in because all the timber had been cleared. And as I said, depending on the type of cutting head you have, they can also put in line. This is the line that I was talking about, where the operator did the clearing and then came along and just used the back of the cutting head to scratch that line in. So he built that whole line. It took me a minute to figure out when I walked up on him. I thought, what is that guy doing? He's just scratching in the ground. He's not cutting trees. And then I got up to him and he was putting the line in. So a real efficient machine. Okay, your impacts, both your wheeled and tracked machines, if you put them on ground that's too steep for them and too steep for a tracked buncher, like I said, over about, my experience has been 45% or so, they really start to break traction with the ground. The tracks will dig. I've seen wheeled machines spin and dig on 30% ground before when they were struggling trying to get up the hill. So if you put the machine on sites that are too steep for the machine to efficiently operate, you'll start to get more impact. Tracked machines also have cleats or grousers on the track and that will penetrate the soil. That's what gives them the traction on steep ground. But if you have a resource, you know, an arc resource that's real close to the soil, like pottery shards or something, and you don't want soil penetration, be advised those cleats will penetrate the soil for several inches. Tracked machines, because they have a boom that reaches out, will cover a much smaller percentage of the area than a wheeled machine. A wheeled machine has to go back and forth and back and forth. So a tracked machine will cover a smaller percentage of the area. That's really more of an impact, I think, probably in operations under wet conditions in logging, and we probably won't have that here, but just be advised that a tracked machine will cover a smaller percentage of the area. And as I mentioned, most of your site impacts are going to be from putting a machine on something that's too steep from them. In most cases, feller bunchers operate with very limited site impact because they're just cutting the tree. They're not digging in the ground. On to skidders. We mentioned skidders just a minute ago. They're used for skidding trees, and you can use them for line construction. I've done that before. This one has a grapple, and those bunches, if you keep wondering, well, why do they bunch the trees? Well, that's because this grapple can back up to a bunch and grab 15 trees at one time if they're bunched. So the feller buncher, by bunching, makes the skidder operate very efficiently. Okay, rubber-tired skidders are going to drag those whole trees from where they're cut to a decking area. They do have this light-duty blade on them. That's not really designed for excavation. It's designed to push fallen logs out of the way so they can make a skid trail. And at the landing area in logging, that's used to push all the trees up into a deck so you don't have logs scattered all over the place. They push them up to save room at the landing. So it is not designed for excavation, but it can do it. I've put fire line in with them before. I've put prescribed fire line in with them before. They can do it, but they're not really designed to do it. If you've got a dozer, have the dozer do that. And we have a video of a rubber-tired skidder. You'll notice that the machine has tire chains on it in the middle of the summer. Most operators on steep ground will do that. It provides additional traction and it protects the tires. He's even got an E number there. Okay, so he's decking the wood. And then he could use the blade to push it farther up. What he does is he uses the grapple, and he wants to move those tops a little farther in to get them out of the way to conserve room at the landing. So he lifts them up and then he backs in. But often you'll see them use that blade to push. Okay, on incidents, they're going to be used for skidding whole trees that's cut by a feller buncher off the line. You can skid them to a decking area alongside the line. I know some people like to establish areas along the line and deck in areas adjacent to the line. They'll cut out a decking in bay and then they'll deck on the line because they don't want to take them all the way to a road. You can take them all the way to the road if you want. So whatever you want to do, they can do. And as I mentioned, the blade on a skidder, you can put in Fireline in a pinch. I wouldn't recommend it if you've got a dozer, but if you don't have the dozer and you need a line, don't hesitate to use a skidder blade to put in Fireline. And down below, you can see trees that were skidded off the line. That actually is on an incident. And they were taking them off the line and decking them up. And then after the incident, they moved in a processor, made them into logs, and loaded them out as a product. Okay, skidders, they're going to be moving cut trees off the line, and that's going to require multiple trips up and down and up and down and up and down the fire line. And that will create what we call in logging a skid trail, where the skidder has made a trail and it's skidded repeatedly on that. Skid trails can get fairly pounded, especially if it's steeper and you have a lot of drags that go over them. And that soil is possibly going to be displaced, and that trail will likely require some rehab after the incident. So skid trails, they tend to sweep the material out of the line, the topsoil, and you'll have a berm on both sides. I've always liked to pull that berm back into the trail rather than just put in water bars. Actually put that displaced duff and topsoil and slash back into the fire line for rehab. And you'll see a picture of that when we have excavators here in just a moment. So that'll be your impact from the skidders, is the skid trails. On to dozers. Primary use line construction. They can be also used for skidding trees. You see that one has a grapple on it. Not all dozers will have that, but this one does. This dozer here is designed to do logging, to do log skidding. They're also good for knocking over hazard trees. If you don't have a feller buncher for that, they can push hazard trees over. Okay, they are rigid framed machines. This is a rigid frame. There's no give to it. You'll see them come in all different sizes. They go from things you use in open pit mines to small dozers that people will use for light excavation around homes and things like that. Most of them are this kind of mid-size. That's about like a D5. It would be a type 2 dozer. That's real common on incidents. That's a good size. All dozers will have a blade in the front. For most dozers, that's their primary purpose, is moving dirt. I get my colleague when we teach in our Larry series slaps my wrist every time I call it dirt instead of soil. But in this case, you're digging, so I think it's fair to call this dirt. And they are probably the most widely used piece of equipment on incidents. You'll always see dozers. For decades, they were the only type of big equipment that you saw out there was dozers, because we didn't have the feller bunchers 30, 40 years ago. That blade is useful for clearing and putting fire line down to mineral soil. If they've got a grapple, they can skid logs, as you see in the upper picture. They can push over hazard trees, as you see in the middle picture there. You can do that safely because the operator is protected in a cab. If they have a 6-way blade, like you see here, a 6-way blade, you can go up, down, side to side, and you can tilt. So when you hear someone talk about a 6-way blade, it means that they can tilt it. When you have that feature, and most dozers will have that on incidents, not all, but many, let's say many. You can angle that blade, and if you only want a fire line that's 2 feet wide, all you do is you cut with this part of the blade here. You don't need to use the whole blade. You can cut with a small portion of it if you want to have real light impact. So it gives you one more option to minimize your impacts out there, if that's what direction is to do. or you can drop the blade and cut a fire line to blade width. Okay, if you use these for clearing or brush, they can have a significant impact, because if you're using them to clear, you've got to root the trees out by the roots. You got a root attached to the tree. If it's in brush, you still have to get the blade low enough to dig the chaparral or the brush out, and that creates what I call a real potato patch effect. You really impact the width of that line that you put in with those machines if you're using them for clearing. If you have dozers clear, they're going to have a much higher impact than if you use a feller buncher to clear. A feller buncher will cut the vegetation and set it to the side without having to push it out by the roots. A dozer doesn't have that option. It's going to push them out by the roots. So that impact can vary with a dozer, from very significant if you're using them for clearing, or pretty minor, depending on if you've cleared it already and the dozer comes in and angles the blade and puts in a fire line to mineral soil that's only 2 feet wide. Most cases, those fire lines that are put in by a dozer are going to require rehab in most cases, some type of rehab. Okay, and here's an example. Here we are in Chaparral in Northern California. I think these folks were putting in a fire break as preparedness outside of an incident. But you can see what they're doing. They've got 2 dozers working, and they're just peeling the top of that ridge off and pushing all of it down the hill. Well, they're taking a good portion of the topsoil probably down there with them. So I'll show you a machine here in a minute that you could do this same type of thing, very similar to it, and have a greatly reduced impact. So another example you're going to see in a minute of how you can use equipment to reduce impacts. This is the traditional way of dozer, all dozer approach. And if we go to using other types of equipment, we can really reduce our impacts out there. Okay, here's an excavator. Excavators are great at line rehab. They are also very good at line construction, and they can push hazard trees over too. They are tracked, boomed machines, kind of like a feller buncher. There's the tracks and there's the boom. This cab can spin 360 degrees. You notice that this one has a blade on the front of it. Some people will refer to these as dozovators. Dozer, excavator, dozerator. They can drop that blade on steeper ground to stabilize the machine. They can also use that blade like a dozer would to move soil. They all have some type of bucket. There's the bucket on the end of the boom, and that's what excavators are generally used for, is digging. If they're on an incident, they have to have a thumb. That's part of Viper requirement, is they have to have a thumb, and this is a thumb. So think of this as look at your hand right now out there in Cyberland. That is the thumb on your hand, and these are the other 4 fingers. So you put your thumb to your other fingers and you can pick things up. Same thing with an excavator. It can put the thumb onto the bucket and it can pick things up. Dozers can't do that. Excavators can, and the excavator can't do it unless it has that thumb. So a thumb is critical if you're going to have them on an incident. They're great for line construction, for rehab. Because they've got that bucket and thumb, like I mentioned, they work just like a human hand, and they can be very low impact and really surgical in the work that they do. Once you've got that skid trail that a skidder's put in, and there's a berm on both sides, these machines can pull that berm back into the skid trail. If you have an excavated trail, somebody needed a side hill and they really cut into the hillside and almost made a road, they can take that with their bucket and they can move all that material back into the excavated area and obliterate it. They can pick up slash and duff and then place it into the fire line for rehab, just like you see here. Now this, I love this picture. I'm so glad I took it. This is all mechanical line. No Pulaskis were used in the construction of this. This was all felled with a feller buncher from here to here. That's the skid trail where I believe it was a tracked skidder, a dozer with a grapple on it, skidded all the cut material out. You can see all the stumps in here. So this, before it was cleared, looked just like this over here. It was thicker stuff. So cut with a feller buncher, skidded with a tracked skidder, and then this line was put in with an excavator. And the way they did it is they took the bucket and they just scraped like this. And this is the material they scraped off. To me, that looks like something that a 20-person crew would put in, but that was all done mechanically. So again, if you had done this with a dozer and you wanted all these trees cleared, they would have been pushed out by the roots, and this would have been a potato patch, and you would have had difficulty getting this shaded fuel break effect. So another example of how you can use different pieces of equipment together and have a much lower impact out there while doing it safer and doing it probably more economically. Okay, there's the excavator, and he's doing the rehab now. That was a little bit farther up that same line that they did. And all of these trees that you see here, he picked those up and placed them across the trail. And as you notice right here, he's using the bucket, and he's going to swing that. The line was right there. I know it's hard to see, but he's just going to move that bucket and take all that duff and that seed bank and move it back into the line. So when you're done, that trail is, it's going to be hard to find that trail in a couple of years because it was low impact to begin with, and then it was rehabbed with an excavator. And now we'll show you a little video of how they can pick things up. Whoop, I knew that was going to happen. And you notice he's going to put it down into the ground fast, so you don't have water underneath. Actually, drive soil because it's got that tuck down. How he uses the thumb to pick it up. Okay. So that's using an excavator, and that's right where he was working. That's what it looks like when it's done. You've got all that organic material back in the soil. You've got the slash laid in there to prevent the water from running straight down it. So nice job. Because they have that boom and bucket and thumb, your line construction is really going to be pretty low impact with an excavator compared to a dozer. One of the drawbacks to excavators is when they show up on incidents, they may not be designed for operations on steep ground. They're not a real common woods machine. They're generally on gentler slopes, and their track system, it may not be aggressive enough to give them traction. Some operators really specialize in taking excavators on steep ground. Others you may get on an incident are their machines aren't really designed to go steep. Equally importantly, their operators aren't accustomed to working on steep ground in an incident. They're used to putting in sewer lines in town or something like that. So that's something to be very heads up on, is not all excavators are created equally. Some of them will go steep. They're used to it. They do it all the time. Others are not going to have that capability. So just be aware of that when they're out there. On to masticators. Masticators reduce fuel height for line construction. They can fall hazard trees, and if you want trees limbed up, if you have a boomed machine like this one here, they can limb trees up as high as that boom reaches, which is about 25, 30 feet, depending on the machine. If you have a machine like this, you can't do that. So this, you're going to say, looks a lot like a feller buncher, a tracked feller buncher. That's because it is a tracked feller buncher. They have just taken the cutting head off. They've put a masticating head on it, and suddenly it is a tracked masticator. This, you may say, looks a little bit like a wheeled feller buncher. That's because it is a wheeled feller buncher that they put a masticating head on. So there's a lot of similarities between the two types of machines. It's just the type of head you have on them. Okay. You'll hear people refer to them as mulchers, masticators. Same thing. They chew vegetation up into small pieces. They can be boomed mounted like you see here, and that is referred to as a boomed masticator in Viper. Heads can also be attached directly to the carrier, just like a wheeled feller buncher, and these will be called strip masticators because they can masticate in a strip. That's just what they're referred to as strip masticators. Your carriers can be either tracked or wheeled, just like feller bunchers. The heads on them will either be a spinning disc, like you see here, and it rotates around a vertical shaft. So that is, you'll hear people call that a vertical shaft masticator. And this is around a horizontal shaft. It rotates like this, like a drum. So you can refer to that as a horizontal shaft masticator or a drum masticator. Boomed machines, again, are capable of working on steeper ground than non-boom machines, so it's similar concept to a feller buncher. So they're going to chew the material up. They're not going to remove it off site, but they certainly have their place. They're great in certain situations. They can create a little bit of a problem here in a minute that you're going to see. First, we're going to masticate some chaparral down around Prescott, Arizona. This is a horizontal shaft, a very small masticator. It's a very small machine, but it was getting the job done.
What's the max diameter of the tree that those masticators can chew through?
Oop, I'm sorry. What was that question again?
What is the max diameter of a tree that those little horizontal shaft masticators can chew through?
It really depends what type of machine you have them on. I can't give you a good answer on that. A small machine like this, I think, doesn't have a lot of horsepower, doesn't have a lot of hydraulics. It could eventually chew through it. I mean, you can cut a tree down with a pocket knife, but it's going to take a while to do it. So I can't give you a real good answer on that. I think using masticators for taking down larger trees is actually a really poor practice that you'll see why in just a second here. So I wouldn't get too hung up on how big a tree they can take down. They can do it. It's just going to take them time to do it. So I don't know if that answered your question real well, but as I said, they reduce vegetation height. They don't take it off the site. It remains on site. It's not like a feller buncher where you cut it and you drag it away. With this, the material's just in smaller pieces. You change its state, you lower it, and you make it in smaller pieces. So for that reason, to follow up on your question here maybe a little bit, and explain why I don't get too hung up on how big they can go. They're best used in light fuels like chaparral, juniper, and conifer regen, not large conifer trees. Large conifer trees you want to cut and take away. If you do attempt to masticate a larger tree, like that little pine you see right behind the machine in the upper picture, if you masticate that, you're going to take all that material and you're going to put it on the ground, and you're going to have a mulch layer, if the whole stand is like that, several inches thick, which I have seen people do. And in the Southwest, in most of the country we're in, that stuff is going to stay there a while. And I'll show you a picture here in a second where that really created a problem. Okay, they can be used to reduce the fuel height adjacent to roads. Here you've got a road. The fire was over here, and this is in Eastern Oregon. They put in 3 masticators, and each of them took a 50-foot wide bite, and they made a line through this lodgepole regen that was I think it was 40 feet apiece, 120 feet wide, almost 2 chains. That was like 8 miles long, and I think they knocked it out in 3 days, what I was told. So they did that, and then they burned all this out. It's even better in Chaparral. It's been many years since I was involved with any burnout in Chaparral, but as I recall, it either didn't go or it went too good. And if you masticate the material, like you saw in that previous one, you take that chaparral, you put all the material down on the ground, and you can actually get a nice, controllable, even burnout by taking that material, because chaparral has a lot of dead mixed in with it, put it down on the ground, and then burn out from that. Okay, to follow up, when you mulch heavy fuels, and again, this was down in Prescott, they had a bunch of dead pine, and they masticated it, and they wound up with this mulch layer. Not a lot else they could do because they were trying to masticate the whole site. But if you had a stand like this, if it was thicker, and you masticated all those trees rather than drag them away, this is what you would get. And there was a story down in the Southwest in Region 3 where they went in and they masticated a lot of trees in a stand for fuels reduction years ago. And the Lost Conscious fire came along and got into that duff layer and never got up into the crowns. The crowns of the trees were intact, but it killed every leaf tree they had out there because that mulch layer just sat there and cooked, and you'd get the same thing in a prescribed fire. So that's why I don't recommend masticating in heavier fuels. Light fuels, chaparral, PJ, conifer regen, great tool. Heavier fuels, standing trees, get in the feller buncher, cut them, drag them away. Okay, there you can see some chaparral, and this was urban interface. There's that house would probably cost $500,000 today, but this is right up next to a bunch of subdivisions down in Arizona. And there's a before and after picture again, chaparral around Prescott. You can see that this tree right here is that tree right there. So not a lot of soil disturbance. So rather than push things out with a dozer, masticator's a great tool. Okay, as I've mentioned about 3 times already, I didn't get all the redundancy out of this presentation apparently. They reduce fuel height with little to no soil disturbance. Your dozers can't do that. So a lot less ground impact, a lot less rehab. A narrow fire line down to mineral soil can be placed on the outside. So go ahead and masticate 120 feet, whatever ops wants to do, and then put, a 4-foot wide, 8-foot wide fire line on the outside of that to mineral soil rather than mineral soil the whole thing. Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Okay, pumper cats. We're almost through the equipment. Skidgens and pumper cats, they supply off-road water. If there's no road, you can't get an engine to it, you don't want to make a long hose lay. Skidgens and pumper cats shine at that. A skidgen is a rubber-tired skidder with a water tank and a pump on it. A pumper cat is a dozer with a water tank and a pump on it. Because this has a blade, it also functions as a dozer, so it could also put in fire line at the same time if you need it. Okay, as I said, skidgeons and pumper cats are skidders and forwarders. This machine is a forwarder that's converted to off-road water haulers. So you can get water to crews way far away from the road. So reduces that dry mop. Your tank capacity goes from, this one is a small one. This one is like 250 gallons. That's 3,000 gallons. So it's like a water tender that can climb mountains. Generally, they're going to be on fire lines. They're going to be supplying crews with water. So they're really not going to have much of an impact. They're not going to be disturbing the soil. They're not going to be pushing trees over. They're going to be operating from established fire lines. Wheeled machines will roll over the ground, and your track pumper cats are going to have a similar impact as a dozer walking over it. Those cleats, those grousers, will penetrate the soil. But if the line's already in, you've probably got that disturbance already. So not a lot of impact from skidgeons and pumper cats to resource. Okay, we'll talk briefly about a mechanical task force, and I've alluded to it a little bit already. These machines work as a team, and you see a team of them there. This was a training exercise. You've got a machine that does tree falling. That's your feller buncher. You want to get those trees out of there. That's your rubber-tired skidder. You want a dig line. That's a dozer or an excavator. You want a masticator or a mulcher. That is a masticator. There's the head right there. So you can combine these machines into what's called a mechanical task force. And in Region 1, you can actually order them. They are a resource in Viper, and you order them and you get a task force. So as I mentioned, I got ahead of myself here. Feller buncher cutting, rubber-tired skidder dragging stuff away, a masticator masticating brush down, a machine to put it to mineral soil, your dozer or excavator, and then a machine to supply water for the crews. Now, depending on what your fuel and your fire situation is like, you don't need all those machines, or maybe you need more of one than another. If you've got a lot of falling to do, you're probably going to have multiple feller bunchers, because a skidder will be able to keep up with a couple of feller bunchers if the skidding isn't very far. So you can tailor your task force to work as a team on the type of fuel that you want. And in Region 1, when you order a task force, you get a certain set of equipment, and you also get a working form, or non-working foreman, excuse me, in a four-wheel drive pickup. So they come as a unit. It's just like ordering a 20-person crew. You don't order each person by name. You order a crew and you get 20 people. With the task force, you don't have to order each machine. You say, give me a task force, and it shows up as a team. Okay, on to safety. I think we got like 3 slides left. I'm going to make my time here, I hope. So when you're out there being a reed and you're working around this equipment, you've got to look out for yourself. And one of the first things I was ever taught about working around equipment is don't ever, ever, ever get below them because of gravity. Rocks roll downhill. You don't want to be downhill. A machine will kick rocks and logs and things like that loose, and they will roll down the hill and hit you. You don't ever want to approach the equipment when it's working. The operator is not expecting you to come walking up on them. Don't get anywhere near them if it's running. If you do have to approach the machine for some reason, you really need to have radio communication. If you don't, you can take your hard hat off and wave it, try to get the operator's attention, tie some ribbon on the end of a stick, wave it back and forth, get their attention, and they will shut down. Always, always wait for the machine to shut down and the operator to open the door. Don't ever walk up on the machine if that door isn't open. When he opens the door, that's the sign, I'm done working, I'm ready to talk to you. If that door's not open, stay away, he might still be working. You also want to avoid hot saws and masticator discs that still can be spinning. When they shut the machine down, the engine's off, that disc can still spin. Operators should take that and do what they call stump it. They'll put it into a stump and it'll stop it. But if they don't do that, that disc will spin for 10 minutes. And if you walk up to it, it's just spinning slowly, but there's so much weight there. If you touch it, you're in trouble. I've heard a horror story about somebody trying to stop it with his boot once, and it cut his boot and part of his foot right off. So stay away from anything that's moving, please. I have heard stories from operators of firefighters just walking up to the machine, and he looks over after he cuts a tree, and there's a firefighter standing 15 feet away from the machine, and the guy just about had a heart attack. So stay away, make sure the machine's shut down. Don't approach until the operator opens the door. Okay, never get within 2 tree lengths of equipment and timber fuels. That's because they knock one tree over, it hits the snag as a domino, and 2 tree lengths away is in the kill zone. If it's a feller buncher or a masticator, I give them 400 feet because they throw things. They'll hit a rock, a chunk of wood. If a cutting tooth breaks, it'll throw it at lethal force. And you'll see on the back of some machines it says, stay 300 feet back. You know, I'll give it another 100, 400 feet is a safe distance. If you do have a machine that somehow passes close to you, just like the ocean, don't ever turn your back on it because they'll knock something down. They'll push a log in your direction. You know, they're potentially a dangerous thing. So don't ever turn your back on a machine as it goes past you. It's not that the operator's not looking out for you. It's just that they can't control what happens when they run over a downed log. Never assume the operator sees you. They're focused on their work. It's not their responsibility to look out for you. I mean, they will to the greatest extent they can, but don't count on the operator for your safety. Never count on somebody else here for your safety. You have to look out for yourself. When they're working and you come walking through the woods, they're probably not seeing you. So don't ever assume that the operator sees you. You're responsible for your own safety. And this is why you don't ever work downhill from equipment. That is a root wad from logging they did about 30 years before, and they had a dozer about 600 feet up the hill, putting in a line, and I was standing down on the road next to somebody, and the guy next to me said, "Oh, look at that." And it took me that long to get my camera out of my Nomex and get my glove off and take a picture of the last 30 feet of that root wad coming down the hill. But that came down the hill probably 600 feet. So that's a real life example of why you never, ever get downhill from the equipment. Okay, and that's what I got for you, folks. I'm gonna stop sharing here. And if we got any questions, I'll be glad to entertain them.
We've been trying to, a lot of people have been answering questions in the chat and from their experience, and that's been great. There is one question. David Bishop asked, what's the current status of the evolution of the Big Iron project in the Northern Rockies that he and Stephen O'Brien were co-authors of?
Obi, I haven't talked to Obi in quite a while. Obi O'Brien had kind of my equivalent position in Region 1, and there was a publication that they had out called Big Iron, and I don't know where that's at these days. I'm out of the loop on that one. You could probably chat with whoever's in charge of equipment in Region 1 these days. It's been a while since I chatted with those folks. So that would be all I could offer on that one. I'm sorry.
You want to, maybe there's a sort of a question, a comment, and maybe you can talk about this, about talking to heavy equipment operators when you're a read versus talking through the heavy equipment boss.
What's the question? Oh, just talking directly with the operator?
Yeah, just sort of those politics of.
Oh,
Where
yeah,
everyone
well,
is
you
in
know, if you're a
charge.
read, if there's a heavy equipment boss, that's their link. I would, it's okay to talk to these guys and learn what they're up to. I would avoid putting them in the situation where if you're trying to give them direction and there's a heavy equipment boss, you can only work for one person. So if I was a read and there was equipment operating and there's a heavy equipment boss there, I would certainly go through the heavy equipment boss because that's their chain of command. I wouldn't, if there's a heavy equipment boss there, I would never give direction to an operator directly.
Somebody had a good comment about, if there's downtime, talk to the operators and ask if maybe you can sit in the seat and see how little, and see what they see when they're sitting in there.
That's an excellent suggestion because you don't see necessarily what's in front of that big that cutting head. It does kind of block your view. So yeah, if you've got some downtime and the operator is willing to take some time with you and let you sit in there, most of them, love doing that because they're not around other people that much. And when somebody really shows an interest, they're more than willing to let you jump up in the seat and get a feel for it. That's great experience to be able to do that.
I'd also recommend that if you can, take the heavy equipment boss training and go for your heavy equipment boss qualification. Just even if you never use that, you have that background, then that helps a lot with understanding what's going on within the fire.
I've been advocating for the Larry group to hopefully put together like a one-day course. When I was with the Forest Service, I did have a one-day course that was equipment on incidents that went, it was like this, only it was 8 hours long, and we were able to cover a lot more material. And it was designed for people who were not equipment bosses. It was designed for line officers and ops people and reads and anybody else. So we hopefully might like to try to bring that back.
Right. I think we're just a little bit over time. There's a bunch of good other non heavy equipment questions going on in the chat. But I want to thank you, Bob. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was great. It's always great for reads to know what all this big machinery is.
It's a pleasure to talk to folks that are interested. And I'll give you, if you want to get a piece of paper and a pencil out, if people have questions that I didn't address, I'll give you my phone number. You can give me a ring. And my phone number is area code 406 552 5024. That's 406 552 5024. Don't hesitate to call. I love to talk about this sort of stuff. So I'm retired. I got time on my hands. The only thing that's calling to me now is my third cup of coffee for the day. So, and I am going through some of the chats here. Boy, there's a whole bunch of them. I would have never been able to cover all these. So yeah, if you still have a question, please give me a call. I'll be glad to chat a little bit.
And the chat will be there so people can continue to help each other by answering questions and doing that. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving coming up, and we will have that call. It's the 21st for anybody who just wants to support each other and say hi and have a little read Christmas party. All right. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much, Bob.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Hey, Bob, Pete Irvin here, just chiming in. Thank you, brother.
More than welcome. As you can tell, I enjoy this sort of stuff.
Yeah, man, it shines through and it's super helpful.
Anytime.